In the mafia, the consigliere is one of the most powerful positions in a family, ranking as the third most valuable position behind the boss and underboss. A consigliere acts as an advisor to the boss and is extremely important in maintaining the power of a mafia family. In The Godfather, the two most prominent consiglieres were Tom Hagen and Genco Abbandando. Genco was a childhood friend of Vito and served him throughout his rise to the top of the mafia world, up until his death. Then Tom Hagen came in and took Genco's role as the consigliere. But this begs the question, if this position is so important, then who was the better consigliere to Vito and why? I know you're probably wondering how this comparison can be made, since Genco took a back seat to many other main characters. Despite this fact, there are key details in the book that reveal Genco's true prowess and his leadership. Let's find out how these two legendary characters became consigliere and which ones wins this battle. How did they become consigliere? We will first start with Genco. He and Vito had an interesting dynamic that wasn't seen in the film. Genco was born a Sicilian growing up in Hell's Kitchen, New York, and his family took Vito in when Vito came to New York. They quickly grew very close, and the two became like brothers, and there's a hint that they even knew each other back in Sicily. In the book, Vito went to visit Genco in the hospital when he was suffering from cancer, and Vito said to Genco, "Hurry up and get better, and we'll take a trip to Italy together at our old village." He proceeded to tell him, "We'll play bocce in front of the wind shop like our fathers before us." These statements from Vito show that it is most likely that the two knew each other all before they came to the New York. Vito knew Genco before anyone else in the family, and Genco's family gave him a job at their family grocery store. The two possessed an unshakable bond that wasn't shown in the movie, and when Vito lost his job to Fanucci's nephew, Genco offered to steal food in order to help Vito, but he declined. For all these reasons, when it came to picking his first consigliere, it was an easy choice for Vito, as he had a lifelong and loyal friend. He even named his oil company after Genco. Now, this leads us to Tom Hagen, who took over the consigliere position after Genco's death. There is a deleted scene in the first film that shows Vito and his sons visiting an ill Genco in the hospital during Connie's wedding. He died later that night to cancer, and Tom ended up taking over as the new consigliere. Tom's road to becoming consigliere wasn't that easy though. Tom originally was found by Sonny, who was living on the streets for more than a year. Once Sonny found him, he took a 12-year-old homeless Tom in and begged Vito to keep the kid. Ever since then, Tom was the adopted fifth kid of Vito and Carmela. This act by Vito is very similar to how Genco's father took a young Vito in when he came to New York. You could argue that this is the reason Vito did this, knowing how it felt to be taken into a family. It took Tom a while to join the family business, as he took a different path than the brothers. Vito sent Tom to college, and Tom took it upon himself to go to law school after. Once Tom finished law school, Vito offered to support Tom in sending him clients, start him in real estate, and furnish his office. But Tom looked at Vito and told him, "I would like to work for you." The Don was surprised, but also pleased, saying, "You know who I am?" To which Hagen nodded. Vito requested Tom work 3 years of general law practice, in addition to working within the family business. He did well working at a top criminal lawyer law firm, and fully transitioned to working within the family business after that. And once Genco passed, Tom succeeded him. There are a few remarks made in the novel that show who the true consigliere was. Let's look at each of these consiglieres' track records and see which one reigns supreme, and the answer may surprise you. We'll start with Tom. Tom's first test came when he had to negotiate with Jack Woltz, the movie producer who had been keeping Johnny Fontaine out of a role in a movie. Now, when we see Tom go to speak with Woltz, he is met with disrespect and contempt by him. But it is highlighted in the book that the Don instructed him to never get angry when negotiating and to never make a threat. This stuck in Tom's head, and he did just that during the meeting. The initial conversation between the two goes into more detail in the book, and Tom Hagen keeps his cool while also intriguing Woltz into taking up this offer. He continued to make remarks that showed his client, Vito's power, and by the end of the conversation, Woltz couldn't help but check out Tom. And once he went to Waltz's house, he continued to keep his cool at dinner, knowing he had the Don's muscle to get Johnny the role. His ability to think logically while dealing with Waltz proved to be valuable. You could say Tom passed his first test as consigliere. Now, let's take a look at the war between the 5 families. After Don Corleone was almost killed, Sonny took over as the acting boss, which proved to me much more challenging for Tom. You see, Tom wasn't a gangster growing up, and rather spent his time at schools, so when the war broke out, he had no experience in a situation like this. When Vito went down, there was no true underboss below Sonny, so Tom had to step up and do extra to help the family here. Tom and Sonny argued immensely during this period, and Sonny even says to Tom, "If I had a wartime consigliere, a Sicilian, I wouldn't be in this shape. Pop had Genco, look what I got." Obviously, Sonny loses his cool a ton and wasn't a good Don himself, and apologized right after. But this is a revealing statement that we will come back to later. Tom struggled in this period mainly because of Sonny's temper, but you could argue Tom could have come up with different angles and strategies to look at the war from rather than fighting with Sonny. Even Michael steps forward when no one knows what to do and has to come up with a crazy plan to take out Sollozzo. Tom lacks the street smarts in these situations to help the family to really get an upper hand in the war, and later blames himself for Sonny's death. Now let's discuss Genco. Genco became consigliere once Vito founded Genco Pura's olive oil company. Genco handled many tasks and business matters for Vito and was noted as an extremely intelligent individual. He handled the importing of the olive oil from Italy and buying at the proper price. He helped hire good lawyers for Genco Pura oil with many contacts in the police department. His contacts proved valuable, and this included a system of payoffs set up to ensure they grow their power. Genco also played a role in the olive oil war. Although it is a gray area and not much information is known, it is thought Genco provided Vito with valuable insight and strategic thinking during this war. This war was a bloodbath, with the Corleones not only going up against Salvatore Maranzano, but also Maranzano's contacts like Al Capone. He was the top gun at the time, and it's hard to argue that the Corleones would have come out on top with a subpar consigliere. Now, there are moments in the film where Genco does seem a bit naive and not as sharp as he's told to be in the book. In a deleted scene, he tells Vito how Don Fanucci got attacked and goes on to tell Vito he has connections and that those kids are going to be in a world of trouble. But Vito knows and tells Genco he's not such a big shot. You could say this lack of judgment from Genco is a sign of weakness and unintelligence. It is important to note that Genco was not considered at the time, though. So, who was the better consigliere? Even though there's not too much information on Genco, he is the superior consigliere, and there are some key nuggets in the book that indicate this. The first point is when we discussed Sonny yelling at Tom Hagen earlier. Now, you could say that this is just Sonny losing his cool, and this doesn't mean much, but this may mean more than you think. Sonny saying, if he had Genco, a wartime consigliere, that he wouldn't be in this shape shows the reverence he has for Genco. Genco is Vito's most trusted friend, and it's clear that everyone else respected him too. So, there's an argument that could be made that if Sonny truly did have Genco, he'd be in better shape during the war. Genco was a wartime consigliere who had the street smarts and war mentality that Tom just never possessed. Sonny surely would have taken Genco's advice with more weight and valued it more than Tom's, which could have resulted in Sonny being alive instead of dead on the causeway. Another thing to look at is that Tom Hagen wasn't a Sicilian, and consiglieres were always of Italian heritage. So this was a shock to other mafia families, and many of them were even making fun of the Corleones, calling them the Irish gang. It also notes in the book that Hagen was not the man Genco was. Another key point was after Sonny died. In the book, once Tom hears the news, he escapes to his conference room and begins trembling. The book goes on to say, he knew now he was no fit consigliere for a family at war. He'd been fooled, faked out by the five families and their seeming timidity. Just a few short lines later, it says that Genco would have never fallen for this trap that the five families set, and that he would have smelled a rat and smoked them out. This point proves that Genco was the superior consigliere and intelligent man. Another key point that points to this conclusion is when Michael cuts Tom out of being consigliere. He goes on to say he's not a wartime consigliere and knows what he and Vito have planned. Vito advises Michael and the two don't believe Tom can handle their plan. The truth is, Genco was a Sicilian and knew how the mafia operated. He knew the ins and outs of the game and had to claw his way to the top with Vito and the others, whereas Tom possessed school smarts instead. Although Tom was still intelligent, Genco beats him for who the better consigliere is. And that's the video. Who do you think was the better consigliere? And why? Thank you for watching and for your support.